Today is the 17th of February, and this is Pastor Howie with you with a reading from the Celtic Daily Prayer, Book 1, The Journey Begins, and the scriptures that go along with this. I started this video just a few moments ago and was interrupted because we're having somewhat of a storm, and apparently my connection was not good, so I switched to Wi-Fi. I usually just use the connection to Verizon, and it works fine. So if you caught any bit of that, then this is kind of a repeat. But today we'll be looking at the writings of Horatius Bonar, and previous to that we'll be looking at these scriptures: Psalm 63 verses 1 and 8, Song of Songs chapter 7 verse 11, and Luke chapter 9 verse 10. And these passages are all about relations and our relationship to God and the refreshment we find in that relationship with Him. Time to be alone with Him, so to speak. So this psalm is a psalm of David, and it was written when he was in the desert of Judah. And verse 1 expresses that desert experience. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water, which literally was true in David's experience, but spiritually was true as well. And that's what he is expressing. And for us, sometimes we find ourselves in spiritual deserts and spiritual desolation. And so Psalms like this are very important for us to remember, and to remember David's example, that he turned to the Lord even in the midst of this physical hot and dry desert, and in the spiritual desert that he was in at the same time. He goes on in verse 8 and says, I cling to you, your right hand upholds me. So he was assured that God was with him, and he was pursuing God, and not just mad about his circumstances or in desperation because of his circumstances. Perhaps he was a little bit desperate. It is a desert, but certainly not in a place where he was forgetting God. He remembered God. He was clinging to God to get him through this desert experience. He's the author, if you will, of Psalm 23. Yea, though we walk through the valleys of the shadow of death, your right hand is with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And so this is the spirit that David had, especially when he went through difficulties, and it can be ours as well. In Song of Solomon, Song of Songs, chapter 7, written most likely by David's son Solomon, who succeeded him on the throne of Israel and Judah, we read these words, which are attributed to the bride speaking to the bridegroom. Remember, Song of Songs is a wedding song. It's a wedding poem. And it's very descriptive, and it's definitely very intimate, and it's a love poem for probably used in wedding celebrations. But this is the bride speaking to her bridegroom. Come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages. So we are the bride of Christ. And would this be a reflection of our heart's desire to just maybe get away from things and spend time with our bridegroom, the Lord Jesus Christ? And we see that also kind of fulfilled in Luke chapter 9, verse 10. Luke 9:10 begins the parable, or not the parable, the history of where Jesus fed the 5,000. And it follows on the heels of the apostles being sent out by Jesus to preach and teach the gospel, and then they returned and they reported to Jesus what they had done, verse 10 tells us, and then we find that he, our bridegroom, their bridegroom, then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. They got away from the busyness of that ministry, got away for a time, and Jesus took them away so that he could spend time with them and they could spend time with us. And that's sort of the theme of everything we find here. And in the reading for today from the Celtic Daily Prayer book, which is from Horatius Bonar, Words to Winners of Souls, we find this. Why is there so little anxiety to get time to pray? Why aren't we worried more about the time we spend in prayer? It is the want of these solitary hours that not only injures our own growth in grace, but makes us such unprofitable members of the Church of Christ, and that renders our lives useless. It is not in society, even Christian society, that the soul grows most rapidly and vigorously. In one single quiet hour of prayer, it will often make more progress than in days of company with others. It is in the desert that dew falls freshest and the air is purest. So with the soul, it is when none but God is nigh, when his presence alone, like the desert air in which there is mingled no noxious breath of man, surrounds and pervades the soul. It is then that the eye gets the clearest, simplest view of eternal certainties. It is then that the soul gathers in wondrous refreshment and power and energy. And so it is also in this way that we become truly useful to others. It is when coming out fresh from communication with God that we go forth to do his work successfully. And Bonar knew this. He was a man who was a preacher and a man who was renowned for some of his writings, and he understood that it's important for us to get away and be alone with God from time to time. And the other reading, the meditation for this day in this book, day 17, is very short. And it is short, and it is a prayer that we can use to begin a time of solitude with God. Here am I, Lord. I've come to do your will. Here am I, Lord. In your presence, I'm still, which echoes Psalm 49 and verse 10, which says, be still and know that I am God. So that's what I have for you today. And may you find time, even today, even now perhaps, to just spend some quiet moments with God and to breathe gently and slowly and become aware of the presence of God that envelops you and pervades you, and just find that refreshment, that quenching of spiritual thirst, that direction, perhaps that word from the Lord that will energize you and carry you through this day and perhaps days to come. We'll not see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is my wife's surgery. I have to be at the hospital at 5:30 in the morning, and I'll be probably busy. I'll be able to wait with her until she's taken to the operating room, and then I'll be able to wait someplace in the hospital until I find out that she's in recovery. So it's a highly distracting and busy place. It's not a place to go to rest, really. But I know the Lord will be with us. I know the Lord will be with those who care for Brenda. I know that God is mindful of us and cares for us. So I am mindful and care of you and care for you, and ask that you'd be praying for us. And so we'll see you Sunday morning, Lord willing, as we broadcast another live worship service from Fowler Baptist Church. Till then, farewell and be well.